Over the 3 decades of my career in public innovation, I've observed time and again some communities that make great strides forward and others that seem in a kind of steady state of decline. I've often asked, why is it that some communities make progress and others don't? And why is it that when we implement an initiative in one community, it creates great success, and in another community, it doesn't seem to gain any traction? I remember sitting in our conference room in our office once with my colleagues, and we had put up the characteristics of change from 15 different communities. And as we looked at them and asked ourselves these questions, all of a sudden we discovered communities go through stages. Now, there are 5 stages that we've discovered in all. We call them community rhythms, and every community is in one of them. The waiting place, impasse, catalytic, growth, and sustain and renew. We often calibrate our strategies and solutions as if we're in one of the later stages like growth or sustain and renew. Yet, in my 3 decades of doing this work, what I've come to understand is that most communities are in one of the first 3 stages. And if we don't calibrate our strategies to the stage of our community, well, those strategies are doomed. Over the years, we've developed do's and don'ts for each of the 5 stages. And what we've come to know is if you can calibrate your strategies and make intentional choices about what you're doing, you can actually accelerate your way through a stage. You can't skip a stage, much like any other developmental model, but you can accelerate your way through it if you make the right choices. Now, I love this framework. It's one of my favorite ones from the Institute. Each time I work with folks on it, 2 things happen. First, people get this sense of being liberated. All of a sudden, they discover that of course they can't create all the change they want all at once, especially if they're in one of the earlier stages. The second thing is a greater sense of accountability. And I don't mean a punitive sense of accountability. I mean a kind of uplifting, can-do spirit that now people see, here is what I can do. Here's what my contribution can be. Here's how we can make progress together. The key to creating a sense of possibility and hope is making progress. When you understand what stage you're in, what the implications are, and what steps you need to take, that's when you can start to create the progress in your community. In the waiting place, people are just waiting. They're stuck. There's little energy, and people can't agree on what's wrong. People have a sense that something is off, but they can't quite put a name to it. Moreover, there's a disconnect between leaders and the community. And there's also a disconnect between what organizations are doing in the community and what matters to people. You often hear in the waiting place people say things like, I'm just waiting for the next mayor to get elected to fix our problems. So here are some of the common mistakes we make given the characteristics of the waiting place. We believe we have to rush into action, except there's little agreement about what to do. We believe if we create comprehensive solutions, we'll gain people's attention, except there's little trust between and among people and between leaders in the community. Next, we decide to try to guilt people into paying attention and stepping forward, except when you're not quite sure what's wrong and people are yelling at you, what do? We tend to put our hands over our ears and retreat. So what can you do in the waiting place? Here's some things I've learned over the last 3 decades. We need to engage people in community conversations so that they can crystallize what it is that they're concerned about and they can start to focus on something they hold in common. Second, we need to focus on small wins. Big actions aren't going to work or take hold. We've got to figure out what's doable. Third, it doesn't really matter what issue you pick to focus on. What matters is that it has resonance with people and you can make some progress taking action on it. You may remember the Dr. Seuss book, Oh, the Places You'll Go, where he writes about the waiting place, where people are waiting for a plane, the next train to come, where people are waiting for another opportunity. When people are waiting, what's important is to help them take small, doable steps so they can get out of the waiting place. In the waiting place, there's little energy and little agreement about what's wrong. Well, in impasse, everything's come to a head. People can name what's wrong, and there's a lot of pent-up frustration, oftentimes anger. In impasse, you often hear people say things like, enough is enough, it can't go on like this anymore. But here are some common mistakes we make when trying to move through the impasse stage. We confuse agreement on what's wrong with agreement on what people want to do, but seldom does such agreement exist. We often create comprehensive strategies and solutions and announce them at press conferences, except there's so little trust in the community and so little agreement about what to do, these efforts just stall out. So what can you do to help a community move through the impasse stage? Well, we've got to bring people together to engage in conversation to help them identify not only what's wrong, but to start to articulate what they're for. Otherwise, we'll spend all our time wallowing in people's complaints and their endless claims. We've got to figure out what language helps people identify and imagine a better future. But this has to be authentic. It can't be sloganeering. And we've got to figure out where we can find small wins, things that are doable, where we can demonstrate people coming together and working in new ways. Don't try to take on all the negative forces and fight against them. They'll overwhelm you. Instead, look for those small windows where you can get gains and demonstrate what kind of progress is possible. In the catalytic stage, exciting things are starting to happen. There's new energy in the community. New people are coming together in new ways to make things happen. You can start to see pockets of change emerging in the community. People often say in the catalytic stage, there's some good stuff happening in different parts of our town. But there are also some common mistakes we make when we try to move through the catalytic stage. We try to do too much too fast by mistaking the pockets of change for a larger appetite for change in the community. We tend to try to coordinate all the actors in the pockets of change, except the catalytic stage is about innovation. We need to allow people to experiment, to try new things, to see what sticks, even to fail, in order to be able to make more progress. And we often announce new comprehensive solutions, except in the catalytic stage, there's not nearly enough trust and capacity in the community to support those efforts. So what can you do in the catalytic stage to accelerate progress? Well, we need to grow these pockets of change and find ways to support them. We need to form informal networks among folks who are doing work in the pockets, not to coordinate them, but so that they can learn from one another and figure out how they can support one another moving forward. And we need to pay special attention to the growing competition between narratives in the community, between the dominant negative narrative that change is impossible and the new emerging can-do narrative that change is possible. The catalytic stage is an exciting one. You've changed directions, and now you have the opportunity to spread those pockets of change. In the growth stage, there's widespread forward movement and energy. People are working in a common direction. There's noticeable change, and people believe they're on the right path. You often hear people in the growth stage say, wow, we're creating a great community to live in. But there are some common mistakes we make in the growth stage. There are often large systemic issues that have gone ignored. Issues like education, race, and inequities in neighborhood development. Too many leaders and organizations have built fiefdoms, focused more on their own power than on moving the community agenda forward. And we tend to rest on our laurels thinking everything's so good here, we don't have to do anything else. So what can you do in the growth stage to keep your forward movement? Well, we need to bring those groups working in pockets of change together to leverage them and get them working in a common direction. We need to do community-wide engagement processes to coalesce the community's will to tackle some of these underlying systemic issues that went ignored. And we need to ensure that there are groups that span boundaries and bring people together across silos and dividing lines so that we can work together moving forward. The growth stage is an opportunity to work on deep underlying issues that will ensure the future health of your community. In the sustain and renew phase, it's time to examine what's next for the community and how you're going to get there. The dilemma is that it's real easy to slide back into a waiting place if you don't take proactive action. In this stage, you often hear people say, we've created the perfect community. We're done. But here are some of the common mistakes that get made in this stage. We forget that the community is still changing, and we believe that everything is great for everyone, except new challenges are starting to emerge, and there's often a new diversity of people coming into the community. There's often tension between the leaders and organizations who helped you get to the place of sustain and renew, and those who need to take you forward, usually younger leaders, ones with more diversity, newcomers to the community. And the organizations that help propel the community forward at this point oftentimes are as calcified as the groups in the waiting place in Impasse because they're resting on their laurels. So what is it that you can do to continue to make progress in this stage? We need to make room for new leaders at the table. We need to ensure that there are organizations who span boundaries to bring people together around emerging new dividing lines and silos that are starting to occur in the community. And we need to identify those emerging issues and find ways to tackle them together. The opportunity in the sustain and renew phase is not to rest on your laurels, but it's to tackle the new challenges that are before you and to ensure that the community is still moving forward.